The Czechoslovakian Tatra T813 is an absolute beast of an off-road hauler, and in the 1970s was an engineering marvel. From its strong backbone chassis, its complex gearing system, and its high-tech V12, the 1967 Tatra T813 is a vehicle to be respected. In this video, I'll be going over some facts and history about the 813, while taking it on a journey to complete some contracts, so we can see how the truck in-game stacks up to the real thing, and helping you decide if it's something you should have in your fleet. The weather during these winters in the Kola Peninsula takes a toll on the infrastructure, and with an average temperature of 15 degrees Fahrenheit and pretty much constant snow, the power lines are almost always covered in ice. One of those lines needs some beams replaced. I'm going to bring them the materials they need, as well as inspect a few other towers. In 1923, the chief designer at Tatra, Hans Ledwinka, would design a frameless tubular chassis, the so-called backbone chassis, a chassis type which had been tried by other automakers decades earlier. But Hans saw some unique potential with this chassis type and decided to develop it extensively, making it a signature of Tatra. A backbone chassis is a tube down the middle of the vehicle that encases the transmission, driveline, differentials, and axles. The advantages of this is the frame's ability to accept torsion twist and not break the other components of the truck or car. Having a central point to connect to gives the backbone frame better suspension flexibility, which means the vehicle's wheels make more consistent contact with the ground. Since the drive shaft is encased in the frame, it's armored and protected. The modular nature means the frame can be configured to however many axles you need, and the more axles you add, the more the expensive backbone frame actually begins to get cheaper to manufacture than a standard 8x8 ladder frame truck would be. The 813 uses a backbone style chassis, a unique Czech truck sporting some unique Czech technology. The 813 was in production from 1967 to 1982. There were just under 12,000 manufactured across all variants. 4x4 and 6x6 versions of the 813 were primarily for civilian and commercial use. They can be seen being used as cranes, airport tugs, and fire trucks. The primary model made was the 8x8 military heavy hauler, which is the model featured in SnowRunner. These military models were primarily used by the Czechoslovakian, East German, Polish, Indian, and Soviet Union armies, primarily for cargo, material, and troop transport, and can often be seen hauling tanks or artillery behind them. There were also some specialized variants such as bridge layers and heavily armored rocket platforms. This tower doesn't look too worse for wear, but better to have the materials up here anyway. Let's inspect a few more of the towers before heading back down into the valley. Despite not being a truck with a permanently engaged diff lock, the 813 did well enough on my way up here. Never getting downright stuck, but taking a bit longer to get through deep mud and snow. Interestingly, the all-wheel drive is toggleable, and in this case doesn't change fuel consumption. I wasn't sure what the use for that was until I started heading towards the other tower. Down a trail that really only a scout should have been on, around a tight bend I needed the rear of the truck to swing around a bit more, and turning the all-wheel drive off helped the rear of the truck slide. In this case, not having traction was pretty useful. But as I said, this trail was probably better suited for a scout. I pushed the 813 and my luck, and I tipped it. Good thing I have the Tatra parked nearby to come yank this thing over. I focused so much on its frame and the technology behind its design before because there may have been a point where this truck was the most capable in the world. Which I know sounds like a stupid thing to say being as I just rolled it. Not only did it have 20 forward gears, it had an individual tire pressurization system, making it extremely adaptable to its terrain. When a prototype was showcased in 1964, it crossed a 5-foot wide trench, cleared a 2-foot tall vertical obstacle, and drove up a 30-degree slope. And according to truckencyclopedia.com, these were the best recorded figures in the world for a truck at the time. The 813 isn't just any 8x8. There was a time in the world where it was the 8x8, and it deserves recognition and respect for that. I got the Tatra over to get us upright, and used it to go check on the final tower, which was definitely the right move, but this tower is broken as well. In fact, this one breaks a lot. Been a bit of a plague on the maintenance crew, I guess. They're asking us to run some spare parts up to it. I'll take the 813 over to the rail yard and pick them up. If you use the 813 before getting the final engine upgrade, it feels woefully underpowered. I guess the plus side is knowing that Tatra doesn't care if you represent their vehicles correctly, but then again, it's a 40-year-old truck at this point, so. In-game, we get, I assume, a 4.9-liter V8 at the low end, and a 5.3-liter turbo V8 at the high end. The real 813 has an absolute beast of a 17.6-liter naturally aspirated V12 built by Tatra themselves. It can run on diesel, gasoline, and aircraft fuel. With a cast iron block and aluminum heads, multi-port fuel injection, and putting out a hefty 266 horsepower at 2000 RPMs and a massive 730 foot-pounds of torque at just 1300 RPMs, all while being air-cooled. This engine is practically asleep, and it's putting out more power than anything you or I saw on our way to work today. The weird part is, the 813 in-game is actually modeled with a V12 that even has a similar looking exhaust and intake runners to the real engine, which I find interesting being as there's no way it would have ever been seen in normal gameplay. It almost sounds like the real thing. From the front, you can hear the predominant signature whine of the turbine responsible for keeping it cool. The exhaust note, on the other hand, isn't quite as deep or monstrous as it comes up in some videos. The drive to the rail yard was a bit arduous. Muddy slopes, deep snow, some ice, and lots of rocks. There were definitely some longer stretches of the trips that were a crawl due to having to throw it in low to engage the diff lock. But even if the 813 was a bit slow, I never had a doubt it couldn't get through. Now, since we're loaded up with spare parts, we're gonna head back to the tower and take the rest of them to the garage. And I'm gonna take the same way back to the tower, see how the 813 does on the same trail, but with cargo. Let's explore a bit more of the 813's model and dive into the interior. The front half of the cabin is divided in half by the engine cover, which can be fully removed to service the motor. The rear can seat 4 passengers, 2 people on a short bench in the middle, and 1 person each behind the driver and passenger in rear-facing seats. Unlike a lot of vehicles designed for the military, there are absolutely no additional controls for the front passenger, not even like a ham radio, just a basic metal dash and very little legroom by the looks of it. I really like the dashboard on this truck. It's very utilitarian, and the model is very close to the real thing. 2 things catch my eye. First is how awkward the shifter looks. Granted, with the engine taking up most of the space, there isn't really any room for it on the floor, but it being further forward than the steering wheel looks ridiculously uncomfortable to drive. The second thing that caught my eye is that there are 2 keyholes besides the ignition. Running the text through Google Translate, this switch lets you switch which starter you would be engaging, because the 813 has backup starters. And the one near the gauges, I'm gonna say is the engine block heater. Using Google Translate returns a lot of broken and nonsense English, so these are more than likely abbreviations, but things in here do seem to be properly labeled. Switches for diff locks, high and low beams, engine braking, fuel pump switches, and a very interesting and fun to use looking set of turn signals. These things right here. And under the dash, we can see the individual tire pressure system is modeled as well. I kind of feel like the 813 has a very cozy interior with its oddly household-shaped dome lights, and I find the fact that it's a driver-centric interior to be really interesting. I feel like in most military vehicles that the passenger was considered an operator and had at least something to do to assist the driver. Some oddities on the outside of the truck. These little feelers on the side of the truck. At first, I thought they may have just been wide-angled mirrors, like how semis have on the hood to see blind spots. But these certainly aren't mirrors. In fact, they have wires running to them. In every picture I look up, these mostly just look like reflectors, or maybe are upper headlights. The consensus that I got with the help of Reddit is that they're feelers that can be folded down to gauge how wide the truck is. Under the bed, there are additional gas cans, ones that we can't use to refuel, unfortunately. And also under the bed, there is this candy cane stripe pole, which is a tow bar. If you look at it from the side, you'll notice the doors, and that they're nearly the same shape for the front and back. This was so that Tatra would only have to make 2 doors, and then modify them with hinges and handle placements, as opposed to stamping 4 individual doors. Hopefully these parts keep the tower going for longer this time. The drive back to the damaged tower was easier than coming from it. It's a long trail coming back down into the valley. Going downhill helped the trip go much faster. The 813 didn't feel weighed down by the cargo at all. It handled pretty much exactly the same. It didn't feel top-heavy or like the suspension was overly sprung. It's incredibly stable, even when it's in rather precarious situations. I got it wedged at some really odd angles a few times, and on the way back to the garage, I was driving it through a crevice while I was practically on my side. I wanted to know how it fared as a heavy hauler, so I did some testing with the heavy fuel trailer, and the trailer might as well have not even been there. The 813 is a beast that I feel like I've been sleeping on for a while, because it excels at both being a heavy hauler and delivering cargo to those out-of-the-way and difficult-to-reach places. A big turnoff for it is that its add-on functionality is very limited, with only having a sideboard bed, a towing platform, and a saddle high. I actually kind of like this. It's true to what the 813 did in the real world. It was primarily a troop and vehicle transporter, and there are pictures of it with a towing platform. During the journey back, I gained a new appreciation for the 813. The Kola Peninsula, I feel like, is the first map that starts to introduce pathfinding as opposed to having more obvious trails. Driving around the valley and the frozen lake, navigating the shorelines and trying to find breaks in the trees to get to where you need to go. Pathfinding and running through terrain like this is what the 813 was designed to do. It's why so many of them are pictured with plows. They would make their own way. As a military vehicle, when governments in the region needed to move their forces around, the 813 was blazing trails through untamed and undeveloped landscapes, carrying vehicles, artillery, tanks, materials, and food. It was a driving force in shaping that region and helped carve out history. SnowRunner may be the only piece of media that gives us even a slight glimpse into what that must have been like. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed learning more about the Tatra 813. I'm curious what other people's experience or opinions were about this truck, because I really didn't rank it very highly at first, but now I think it's something that I'll be using quite a lot. I really enjoy doing these videos and gaining a new appreciation for these mighty machines, and if you do too, consider subscribing. And if I have a notification bell, I don't think I do, but you know, I don't upload that often, so you won't get spammed, so it would help out. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.